I never imagined one day I'd be thrown out like yesterday's trash by a girl who used to call me Uncle Donnie. My name is Donald Price. I'm 58 years old, been working since I was 16, and I take pride in being a simple, honest man. I live alone in a small two-bedroom house in an old neighborhood called Briar Hill Acres, just outside of Springfield. I've worked for the same family-run company for over 30 years. The company was called Maddox Manufacturing. They built parts for airplanes, and it had been in the Maddox family for 3 generations. When I started there, the owner James Maddox was in his 40s. He was a tough guy but fair. Treated us like people, not numbers. Over the years, I worked my way up from the factory floor to become the operations supervisor. I wasn't rich, but I made enough to pay my bills, fix up my old Ford truck, and keep some money aside for when I'd retire. James had a daughter, Lauren Maddox. She was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, but James didn't let that spoil her, at least not when she was young. I remember her running through the factory when she was a kid, pretending to be in charge, laughing, calling me Uncle Donnie, and bossing me around with a toy clipboard. We all loved her back then. But time has a way of changing people. Or maybe the real Lauren was always hiding underneath the charm, waiting for her moment. James got sick, real sick. Cancer. The kind that creeps in quietly and then pounces. He fought hard for almost 2 years, but by the end of it, he was too tired to keep going. I was at his bedside the night he passed, holding his hand while Lauren stood quietly in the corner staring at her phone. I told him I'd look out for the place. I'd promised him that, and I meant it. After James passed, things changed fast. Within a week, Lauren came into the factory wearing heels too high for a warehouse and lipstick too red for a funeral. She didn't even speak to most of the staff, just called a meeting in the break room, stood in front of everyone with that fake corporate smile, and announced, "Effective immediately, I am now the CEO of Maddox Manufacturing." There were polite claps. Nobody wanted to get on her bad side. I stayed quiet, arms folded, watching her carefully. I could tell she was itching to clean house. She didn't understand the business, but she loved the power. 2 days later, she called me into the office, her father's old office. She was sitting behind his desk like a queen. I walked in, and before I could say anything, she said it like she was ordering a latte. "You're fired, Donnie." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm making changes," she said, spinning in her dad's old chair like it was a toy. "The company's going in a new direction. You're stuck in the past. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. 32 years, and she brushed me off like I was just some extra on her show. I stood there, trying to stay calm. "Lauren," I said, "I made a promise to your father. I told him I'd look after this place." She looked at me with that cold smile. "Well, you can look after it from your porch." And just like that, I was out. The worst part wasn't the money. I had savings. The worst part was the betrayal. I gave half my life to that company. I trained people. I fixed broken machines with duct tape and prayers. I stayed late. I covered for others. And now, because I didn't wear a suit and talk like a Wall Street banker, I was disposable. I spent the first few days in a fog. I'd wake up at 6 out of habit, make coffee, stare at the empty driveway, and remember I didn't have anywhere to go. Friends called to check in, but what could they say? Everyone was afraid. Lauren had started cutting more people. Anyone who questioned her, gone. The place that used to feel like family had become a battlefield. One night, I went down to Hank's bar on Derry Road. Just wanted to sit, sip a beer, and not think for a while. That's when I ran into Kenny, one of the guys from the warehouse. Younger fella, early 30s, smart, loyal. He looked around before sliding into the booth across from me. "They're screwing things up, Don," he whispered like we were spies. "What do you mean?" "She's got some new supplier, some cousin or something. They're selling her cheap junk. Parts are breaking. Clients are starting to complain. But if anyone brings it up, she threatens to fire them. I took a sip of my beer. The wheels in my head began to turn. I had every blueprint, every process chart, and every safety report saved on my home computer. Years of documents. Things that I had built, tested, improved. And if she was cutting corners now, then something big was bound to go wrong. Something dangerous. Still, I wasn't interested in revenge yet. I believed in karma. But karma, as I'd soon learn, sometimes needs a little push. Over the next few weeks, I tried to move on. I fixed up my shed. I organized my tools. I applied for a few consulting gigs. But most people wanted younger faces and shinier resumes. Age is funny. One day you're respected. The next, you're invisible. Then came the call. It was 6:42 in the morning. I was sipping coffee when the phone rang. The screen said, "Private number." "Hello?" There was static. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Donnie?" I knew it instantly. "Rebecca?" Rebecca Grant had been the quality assurance manager at Maddox before she retired 5 years ago. She was one of the sharpest people I ever worked with. No nonsense. Brilliant. And she never liked Lauren. "I heard what happened," she said. "Yeah," I muttered. "It was ugly. She's ruining the place, Donnie." I still talk to some of the engineers. "It's bad. There was almost an accident last week. A stabilizer snapped on a test model. Luckily, no one was hurt." That was all I needed to hear. I didn't want money. I didn't want her job. But I wanted her to feel what I felt like the ground beneath her feet wasn't as steady as she thought. Over the next month, I started building a plan. Not some wild, illegal revenge thing. No, I wanted to do this smart. Clean. I contacted old clients, people I had good relationships with. I asked polite questions. I listened. The complaints were growing. Orders late, quality slipping, promises broken. Then I made the boldest move, yet I started my own company. Just me at first. I used my retirement savings to lease a tiny workspace on the other side of town. I called it Price Precision. I told myself it was just a project, something to keep me busy. But something happened. Word spread. One of my old suppliers reached out, then a former engineer. People I trusted, people Lauren had scared off or ignored. They wanted to work with me. I didn't advertise. Didn't need to. The industry talks. And soon enough, my phone started ringing. A lot. Lauren didn't notice at first. She was too busy playing CEO, flying out to conferences and giving interviews like she was the queen of aviation. But the cracks started to show. One of Maddox's biggest clients, Arlen Airtech, canceled $1 million order. Guess who they called instead? I took that call sitting on a folding chair, eating cold pizza. When they asked if I could meet their specs and deadline, I said, "Yes, sir. I helped design those specs." That was the first domino. I didn't gloat, I didn't post online, I just worked, day and night, quiet, focused. Then came the factory fire. It started small, some overheating issue on a machine they never bothered to replace. But with the poor maintenance and corner cutting, it spread fast. Nobody died, thank God, but the damage was huge. The company was shut down for a week. Lauren went into hiding. And then the media got wind of it. They started digging. That's when she learned one crucial detail. And that's where everything changed. But we'll get to that. The fire at Maddox Manufacturing was the beginning of the end, though Lauren didn't know it yet. From what I heard, it started in one of the older welding units, something I had flagged for replacement 3 years ago. But she'd scrapped the upgrade plan right after taking over. Too expensive, she'd said. Not cost-effective. When the fire broke out, the sprinklers in that section didn't go off. Turns out, the system hadn't been inspected in over a year. OSHA got involved real fast. The story hit local news like a punch to the gut. Headlines read, "Fire halts production at local plant," and "New CEO faces scrutiny after manufacturing mishap." Lauren stayed out of the spotlight for a while. probably hiding in her fancy downtown condo while her PR team scrambled to do damage control. Meanwhile, I was sitting at my small workshop, sipping black coffee from a styrofoam cup, going over specs for a new order. The smell of burnt rubber and machine oil still lingered in the back of my memory from my years on that factory floor. And now, it had all gone up in smoke, literally. A few days after the fire, Kenny called me again. "She's freaking out, Dawn," he said, almost laughing. "She tried to blame the fire on maintenance, but we all know the truth. That machine was on its last leg." I leaned back in my chair. She take any responsibility? Not even a little. She's trying to silence people. Told us we're not allowed to talk to reporters, said anyone who does is out. I shook my head. That girl had learned nothing. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I knew Lauren was the type to fight dirty. If she felt cornered, she wouldn't just go down, she'd try to pull someone down with her. And in her eyes, I was still the biggest threat. I had the knowledge, the trust of former staff, and now I had growing business. The calls kept coming in. Small companies at first tones, burned by Maddox's sloppy service. Then mid-tier firms. People who remembered how things used to be when I was running operations. I didn't have fancy equipment yet, but I had precision, and I had integrity. That alone gave me an edge. I started hiring. Just 2 people at first, then 4. All folks who used to work under me at Maddox. We ran a tight ship, clean floors, careful processes, and double checks on every piece that left our shop. We weren't big, but we were solid. One day, I got a visit. It was a Wednesday morning, around 9:30. I was reviewing a shipment when the bell above the door rang. In walked a man in a black suit, polished shoes, and a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in 20 years. "Mr. Price?" he asked. "That's me." He handed me a card. Legal. Something about intellectual property violation. "I've been asked to deliver this," he said. "Cease and desist." I took the paper, skimmed through the legal jargon. Apparently, Lauren was accusing me of stealing proprietary blueprints and trade secrets from Maddox. She wanted me to shut down Price Precision immediately, or face a lawsuit. I stared at him. "You know this is bogus, right?" "I just deliver the papers," he said, and walked out. For a second, I felt like my knees would give out. My heart raced. A lawsuit like this could wipe me out. I didn't have the kind of money to hire some high-powered lawyer. I barely had enough to keep the lights on some months. But I also knew one thing: those blueprints weren't hers to protect. I'd written most of them, updated the systems, built the training manuals. The only thing I'd taken when I left was my own work copies I had made over years, with emails to prove it. I never once touched anything marked confidential or patented. But fear doesn't care about the truth. It eats at you anyway. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying every decision I'd made, every file I'd opened, every person I'd trusted. What if I missed something? What if she really could ruin me? The next morning, I drove 2 hours to visit Rebecca Grant. She greeted me with a hug and a cup of tea. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said. "Lawsuit," I muttered. I explained everything. She listened carefully, nodding. When I was done, she walked to her old filing cabinet and pulled out a thick envelope. "You're not the only one who kept receipts, Donnie." Inside were copies of emails between her, James Maddox, and me. Proof that we'd been the ones developing most of the operations manuals. Documentation that dated back 10, 15 years. She had it all. Even the files Lauren had never seen. She smiled. I didn't trust that girl. Had a feeling one day someone would need this. I hugged her like she'd just handed me a life raft. And in a way, she had. With her evidence, I called a friend, an old high school buddy named Carl, who'd gone into law. He wasn't the best in the city, but he was good, and more importantly, he knew me. He agreed to represent me pro bono until we could figure out what was what. When Lauren got wind that I had documentation of my own, she backed off. The lawsuit didn't disappear, but it stalled. And in that silence, more clients slipped through her fingers. But she wasn't done. About a week later, I was locking up for the night when I saw a familiar car parked across the street. A sleek silver BMW, windows tinted. It just sat there. No one got out. I stood on the sidewalk staring at it, and after a full minute, it slowly pulled away. The next day, my power went out. Then, my internet. Small things, but they added up. My guys started getting calls from unknown numbers, offering them better deals if they left me and came back to Maddox. One even received a anonymous voicemail warning him to stop backing the wrong man. Lauren had gone full-blown rogue. I reported the threats, filed paperwork, but proving any of it was nearly impossible. She was too careful. I felt the walls closing in again. That's when something unexpected happened. An envelope arrived at my workshop no return address. Inside was a printed stack of emails between Lauren and a supplier named Hendrickson Parts Co. What I read made my blood run cold. The emails showed Lauren had knowingly approved substandard parts, even after the engineers raised red flags. She told them to cut corners, not costs, and even deleted some quality reports to make sure nothing slowed down production. And at the very bottom was an invoice that had been altered. It showed a huge markup, with the extra money being funneled to a private consulting firm, a shell company under the name RLM Solutions. RLM. Rebecca Lauren Maddox. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. Lauren had been skimming off her own orders. She wasn't just cutting corners, she was stealing from her own company. I stared at that final page for a long time. This wasn't just bad management. It was fraud. And now, I had the smoking gun. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat at my table, hands clasped, staring out the window at the moonlight falling across the pavement. I had a choice. I could walk away, send the papers to the board of directors and let them handle it. Or I could do something far more permanent. Something that would make her feel every ounce of humiliation, betrayal, and fear that she had thrown on me. That night, I made my decision. And when morning came, I made a call to a man I hadn't spoken to in over 2 decades. Someone who owed me a favor. That one call would set everything in motion. And what followed? Well, it shook Lauren Maddox to her core. The man I called was named Raymond Dalton. Ray and I had served together in the Army when we were young, both stationed in Fort Leonard Wood, back in the 80s. After the service, I went into manufacturing. And Ray got into things I didn't ask too many questions about. All I knew was he dealt with private investigations now. The kind that didn't advertise on TV or Yelp. He picked up on the first ring. "Donnie," he said, like we'd just spoken yesterday. "You finally callin' in that favor?" "Yeah," I said, "and I need someone who can do more than just dig." "You want dirt? Or you want it buried?" "I want both." I met him the next day at a quiet diner on the edge of town. Ray hadn't changed much. Still wore a black leather jacket. Still had the same cold, steel stare that made you feel like he could read your whole life story in 5 seconds flat. I slid the printed emails across the table. "She's embezzling," I said. "Lying to clients, falsifying invoices, and the company's on the verge of collapse." He glanced through the stack, then raised an eyebrow. "You got more?" "Not yet, but I bet there's more if we poke in the right places." Ray smiled. "Then let's start poking." Over the next week, Ray and I worked in the shadows. He pulled phone records, traced financial accounts, dug into RLM Solutions, and confirmed what we already suspected. It was a shell company registered under a fake name and P.O. box in another state. But the kicker? The business account for RLM was connected to a bank Lauren used for personal spending. It was the same account she used to lease her condo, pay off her luxury car, and even buy herself a 3-week vacation in Turks and Caicos. Meanwhile, Maddox employees were being laid off. Machines weren't being repaired. Clients were pulling out. She was bleeding the company dry. And now, we had proof. Ray even managed to get a hold of a former accountant who had quit 6 months earlier. The guy, named Howard, looked like he hadn't slept in years. When we met him in a coffee shop outside of town, he kept glancing over his shoulder, like he was being watched. She threatened to sue me if I talked, he said. Told me I signed an NDA and that she'd bury me in court. But did you see the invoices? I asked. He nodded. All of them. She was rerouting vendor payments to her shell company. I flagged it. She said it was part of corporate restructuring. Next week, I was out the door. Ray pulled out a small recorder. Mind saying that again on tape? Howard hesitated, then slowly nodded. It was done. We now had enough to bring her entire empire crashing down, but I wasn't ready to drop the hammer just yet. See, revenge is like cooking stew. You don't rush it. You let it simmer, let the flavors settle, and when it's ready, you serve it hot. My plan was simple. Expose Lauren in front of the one group she couldn't silence, the Maddox Board of Directors. Most folks didn't know this, but James Maddox hadn't handed the company to his daughter outright. He'd set up a board made up of 6 senior members, 3 family friends, 2 company veterans, and 1 outside advisor. Lauren had voting power, sure, but she couldn't override them if the entire board turned on her. The problem was they didn't know what she was doing behind closed doors. But I was about to change that. Ray helped me put together a clean, bulletproof packet of evidence. Emails, financial transfers, signed contracts, a timeline, witness testimony, everything we needed. I printed 6 copies, each sealed in a black folder. Then I waited. The moment came during the company's quarterly stakeholder meeting. It was being held at the main office conference hall, same place James used to give us Thanksgiving bonuses and surprise pizza parties when we hit our goals. I hadn't stepped foot in that building since the day I got fired. But that morning, I shaved, put on a fresh button-down, and walked in like I still owned the place. People stared. Whispers followed me down the hall. Kenny gave me a wide-eyed nod as I passed. A few old friends smirked, trying to hide their grins. It was like the ghost had come back to haunt the castle. I walked straight up to the receptionist, placed the folders on the counter, and said, "These need to be delivered to the board before the meeting starts. Tell them it's from Donald Price." She blinked like she'd seen a ghost, then took the folders with shaking hands. Then I left. Didn't say a word to anyone else. Didn't need to. What followed was chaos. The next day, Maddox Manufacturing was on fire again, figuratively this time. Lauren called an emergency press release, but it did nothing to calm the storm. Clients demanded refunds. Investors pulled out. The board went into emergency session. And then, silence. Radio silence. For 3 days. I thought maybe I'd pushed too hard, that maybe they were sweeping it all under the rug, that Lauren had wiggled her way out of it again. Then on the 4th day, my phone rang. Private number. Hello? A calm voice answered, one I hadn't heard in years. Mr. Price, this is Susan Ellis, board chair at Maddox. Would you be willing to meet with us? I paused. What for? We've reviewed the documents. We'd like to discuss next steps. With you. My heart didn't pound. It roared. We set the meeting for the following morning. I wore my best suit, the one I'd saved for weddings and funerals. As I walked into the boardroom, the tension in the air could have sliced through steel. 6 people sat around the long mahogany table, all looking at me, calm, measured, but serious. And then I saw her. Lauren, seated at the far end, pale-faced, hair pulled too tight, hands shaking beneath the table. She didn't speak, didn't even blink. Susan cleared her throat. Mr. Price, thank you for coming. We'll get straight to it. For the next 30 minutes, they asked questions. I answered, showed receipts, explained everything. When I finished, the room went quiet. Then Susan spoke again. We believe it's time for a change in leadership. Lauren shot up, knocking her chair over. You can't do this, she shouted. You have no proof that I... Susan held up the folder. We have everything. Lauren's eyes found mine, burning with hatred. Then, something else. Fear. I'll sue you, she hissed at me. I leaned forward slowly. You already tried. And just like that, security was called. She was escorted out of the building, her protests echoing down the hallway like a storm that had lost its strength. As the door closed behind her, Susan turned back to me. There's one more thing. I raised an eyebrow. We'd like to bring you back. I blinked. Excuse me? As interim CEO, she said, until we can rebuild. You're the only one who still has the trust of our staff, clients, and partners. It was the offer of a lifetime. But it wasn't what I wanted. I shook my head. No thanks, I said. I've got my own thing going now. She smiled. Then perhaps we can contract your company as a key supplier. That I agreed to. As I walked out of that building, a free man, the wind carried the scent of oil and iron and new beginnings. It was over. Or so I thought. That night, a car followed me home again. Same silver BMW. This time, it didn't drive away. It stopped at the end of my driveway. And then a figure stepped out. Not Lauren. Someone else. Someone I hadn't seen in over 30 years. And with him came the darkest secret of them all. The headlights of the silver BMW cast long, eerie shadows across my yard. It was nearly midnight. The air was heavy, still, like the world was holding its breath. I stood on my porch, motionless, as the driver's door creaked open. Out stepped a man I hadn't seen since 1991. Donald, he said, his voice lower than I remembered, but still carrying that same edge. Jackson? I whispered. Jackson Lowe. We served together with Ray. Back then he was a quiet guy, always taking notes, always watching. After the army he vanished. No calls, no postcards. Just disappeared like smoke in the wind. Ray once told me Jackson went deep into the private sectorial hush-hush work with dangerous people. Now he was standing in my driveway, wearing a dark coat, hands in his pockets, eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in weeks. Mind if I come in? I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. We sat in the living room. I poured us some coffee, even though neither of us took a sip. I saw your name pop up in a few places, Jackson said, looking down at the table. When Lauren started moving money, some of it crossed through accounts I was watching. What accounts? I asked. He pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. One's connected to a group she's been tied to. Offshore dealings. Fraud. Possibly worse. I felt my stomach drop. I thought she was just embezzling to pad her lifestyle, I said. Jackson shook his head. That was just the tip. She's not working alone, Don. Someone's been using Maddox Manufacturing to clean dirty money for years. It started before James got sick. Lauren took it to the next level. My mind reeled. She's involved with organized crime? We don't have names yet, he said, but we've got traces, emails, backdoor transfers. She's not smart enough to run it herself, but she is the perfect puppet. Pretty, entitled, and desperate for power. Someone pulled her strings, and now that she's out of Maddox, they're angry. And that's bad for you. Why me? Because you're the reason she lost it all. And whoever's behind her, they don't forget. They don't forgive. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying you're in danger, and not just from her. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house felt like a warning. Every shadow looked like someone watching. In the morning, Ray called. "I just got word from a friend in the bureau," he said. "They've been watching Lauren for months. She's tied to at least 2 dummy corporations that move millions through fake invoices. And they know you're the one who cracked her armor." "What do they want from me?" "To testify," Ray said. "And if you do, you're gonna need protection." I looked around my house, me safe little bubble, and realized I wasn't safe anymore. "I'm not running," I said. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're right," he said. "But these people don't care. They'll bury you in a cornfield if it means saving themselves." The feds came knocking that evening. 2 agents in dark suits, straight from Washington. They asked me to come with them to a secure location. They wanted a full statement. They offered temporary relocation, even witness protection if needed. But before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a text. No name, just a message. "You should have stayed fired, Uncle Donnie." "Lauren." I handed the phone to the agents. They looked at each other. One nodded. "It's begun," the taller one said. "What's begun?" I asked. The second agent pulled a laptop from his briefcase and showed me a live feed. It was a financial tracker. Maddox Manufacturing's account had just made a massive withdrawal. Over 8,200,000 vanished in under 3 minutes. "Where the hell did it go?" I asked. "Shell company in Belize," he said. "That was their emergency exit fund." The pieces were falling into place. Lauren had been a pawn for something bigger. And now, with her empire crumbling, whoever had been using her was cleaning up their tracks. Fast. And I was next on the list. But I wasn't going quietly. I told the agents I'd testify. I'd turn over every document, every file, every name. But on one condition. "I want to confront her," I said. They hesitated. "She's under surveillance," one said. "You'll see her again, but you won't be alone." Good. Because I had one final thing to say to Lauren Maddox. Not as her Uncle Donnie, but as the man she tried to bury. 3 days later, they brought me to a black site just outside Chicago. A cold, concrete room. 1 table. 2 chairs. And then they brought her in. Handcuffed. Makeup smudged. Hair a mess. Lauren Maddox looked at me like she wanted to rip my throat out. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "No," I said, "but you're done playing pretend." She laughed, dry and bitter. "You really think I was running it? I was just doing what they told me. You think they'll stop just because I'm gone?" I leaned forward. "I don't care how big they are. You forgot something." "What?" "I've buried stronger people than you with the truth." She looked away, biting her lip. For a second, just 1 second, I saw it. Regret. Fear. She knew she'd lost. But the storm wasn't over yet. Because just as they let her out of the room, the lights flickered. An alarm blared. One of the agents burst in, pale-faced. "We've got a breach." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They found us." "Who?" He looked me in the eye. "The people behind Lauren." And in that moment, I realized something chilling. She wasn't the end of the revenge. She was just the beginning. The breach turned out to be real, but not a shootout or some movie-style takedown. It was quiet, surgical, a cyber attack, coordinated, sophisticated. While Lauren was in federal custody, some group tried to erase every digital trail leading back to the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the ghost transactions. But they were too late. Ray, Jackson, and the feds had already pulled the data onto isolated servers, paper copies backed up in triplicate, hidden in lockboxes in 3 different cities. It wasn't just about taking down Lauren anymore. It was about burning down the entire rotten tree. And burn it down we did. Over the next 6 months, indictments came down like a thunderstorm. 4 executives at Hendricks & Parts were arrested, 2 board members at rival firms, even a U.S. Customs official. It turned out Lauren's little side hustle had been part of a bigger machine money laundering. defense contract fraud, illegal materials smuggled through private airstrips. She had no idea how deep she'd waded into it. And now, she's in prison. 10 years minimum. No parole. Funny thing is, the first year, she kept blaming everyone else. Said I framed her. Said her father's death left her vulnerable. Said she was used. Lied about everything. But somewhere along the line, she stopped talking. Maybe it finally sunk in. Or maybe she just realized there was no one left to lie to. Maddox Manufacturing was sold off, piece by piece. Some parts were bought by legit companies. Others disappeared into bankruptcy. It was sad, in a way. That place had been my whole life. But I knew James Maddox wouldn't have wanted it to go down like that. As for me, Price Precision is doing better than ever. We've moved into a larger facility, doubled staff, landed 2 major contracts with domestic air carriers. Nothing flashy, just good, honest work. Kenny runs production now. Rebecca consults twice a week. And Ray? He finally bought that fishing cabin he always talked about. I visit him some weekends, just to remind him he's still not as sharp as me at cards. I never went into witness protection. I didn't want to live in hiding. The feds made sure I was safe. And Jackson? He still watches from a distance. Sends the occasional encrypted email, just in case the people behind Lauren ever try to rise again. But I'm not afraid. Because I learned something through all of this. Revenge isn't about anger. It's not about getting even. It's about justice. About standing up when everyone else stays down. About looking someone like Lauren Maddox in the eye and saying, "You don't get to win." She thought firing me was the end of my story. Turns out, it was just the beginning of hers. And mine? Well, I'm just getting started.